All right. Hey, everybody. We're going to give everybody a minute or two here to filter in. While we're waiting for folks to come in, do you mind just putting in the chat where you're dialing in from? What city and what state? And I'll put in my unusual location today, which is Dominican Republic. And I'm that excited about today's webinar that I'm taking time out of my vacation to learn more about HR technology. All right, awesome. So we got Springfield, Melbourne, Florida. Okay, amazing. I think we actually have Melbourne, Australia too. So that's very cool. Atlanta, Portland, Oregon, Provo, Utah. Okay. Good ski area there. Hollywood, Florida. Amazing. Hey, David and William. Nice to see you guys. Hey, Beth, howdy from Austin, Texas. John from Los Angeles. Amazing. This is great. Good coverage across the United States. We'll just give it another minute here. Let people filter in. Vienna, Virginia. I love it how when you see these in the chat, you realize like where all these names come from. It's like Vienna, Kingston, Jamaica. All right, I got another Caribbean compatriot here. Concord, New Hampshire. Hey, Tracy. Tanisha from Alexandra. Nice. Concord, New Hampshire. Amazing. All right. Well, hey, it's awesome to see everybody. Fitchburg, Mass. All right. Out there in Western Mass. I love it. I'm usually in Boston. So thanks everybody for joining us today. If you're looking to learn about kind of what's going on in the HR technology ecosystem, you're in the right place. Today's conversation is for HR and talent acquisition professionals who want to stay on the cutting edge. It's for HR consultants who want to be an amazing resource to their clients. It's for entrepreneurs and product leaders and go-to-market leaders in the HR tech ecosystem, really anybody who's looking at where were we in 2024, latest and greatest stuff, the trends that really drove the market, and what are we looking at in 2025. My name is Phil Strazzulla. I'm the founder of SelectSoftware Reviews. I know many of you, and I appreciate seeing familiar names on these webinars that we've been doing now on a monthly basis for quite some time. Our mission is to help HR professionals to find and buy the right tools, from HRIS and ATS all the way through using artificial intelligence for sourcing, for employee engagement, onboarding, et cetera. The main thing that we do is people can ask our team, hey, this is the size of our company, this is our growth plan, this is our need, this is our budget. What tool should we be looking at? We're looking at a new HRIS. Which of the 300 out there should we actually talk to? How should we think about questions to ask on demos, the pricing that we should expect, et cetera? And anybody on this call can actually book a free one-on-one consultation with one of our advisors. And in fact, I will drop the link to do that into the chat if you are looking for your new HRIS, ATS, et cetera. This is a link specific to people on this call. And I think there's even an offer where if you book a call by the end of the webinar, we'll buy you and your team coffee, which basically means we're going to give you a gift card. You can spend whatever you want on it, but I recommend staying caffeinated throughout the HR tech buying process. With me are two amazing people that I'm excited to learn from today. The first is Lydia Wu, who is a consultant turned people analytics practitioner, turned HR executive, turned AI tech nerd, with a decade-long mission to help HR professionals thrive in the technically complex environment. She's the creator behind Oops, Did I Think That Out Loud?, a channel that provides HR practitioners with witty perspectives and practical advice on all things HR and tech. That's the bio that we have written down for her. I think I'm excited because every time I see Lydia post something online, it's provocative, it's interesting, it makes me think a little bit harder about the things that we're always trying to stay on top of at SSR around HR technology in the changing ecosystem. The other person is Corey Greendale, somebody that I've known for a while. He's the managing director at First Analysis, a venture capital and advisory firm where he's led the office's efforts in human capital technology for 2 decades. He works closely with entrepreneurs as an investor and advisor on growth transactions, and his thought-leading research in the space has been cited for excellence in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. And again, that's the written bio. I think, for Corey, we've talked several times over the years. I'm always learning from your lens as an investor, as a board member, looking at hundreds of these companies a year, and somebody who's been in this ecosystem for quite some time. Again, if you're looking to learn about HR tech and what shaped 2024, what's going to happen in 2025, that's important for practitioners, for your clients if you're a consultant, for your own company if you're on the HR tech side of the coin, this is the webinar for you. We're going to be diving into specific trends, tactics you can take away. And I guess, the first thing that I want to get started with is, Lydia, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the trends that you think helped shape 2024, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So opening up with what you just coined as a Whittier angle, I think I can summarize 2024 with 2 words, and that's AI whiplash. Literally, that thing has taken the HR tech world by storm. And whether we like it or not, it has opened up a lot of us for a conversation of the infusion between technology and HR, and almost the inseparability of you can't really run an HR function today without technology or without an understanding of technology and data. And I think the trend that we have seen across in different iterations is, how do HR teams better ramp themselves up from a technical and data architecture standpoint? Or are we moving that stuff off our plate and into IT teams, as we have seen a few organizations do in the ecosystem as well? So I think moving forward with that in 2025, it is going to be a lot more conversations around how do you ramp up HR's, not just AI, but technical skill set, and how do you make sure that all of your successes, all of your stories, and all of the implementations that you do is rooted in data, which I think is still a point of continuous improvement for a lot of HR teams.
I'm kind of curious, and I know we sort of have it in the agenda to talk about this later on, but I like to just follow the conversation, and I'll encourage everybody to do that. If you've got questions, we had, I don't know, 30 or 40 questions submitted from RSVPs, but if you have questions throughout, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And I will say there's another interactive portion about halfway through this where we're going to do some networking for folks on the call, which is typically a fun thing to do. But I'm really curious, Lydia, when you have seen HR teams where the technology has shifted from HR to IT, what were those solutions? How big were those companies? What were the catalysts? And you think that's a bad thing or a good thing for HR?
I'm not going to definitively say if it's a bad or a good thing, because reality is, if you're a one-person HR shop and you have to balance tech stack versus getting your compliance and your general practices right, you have to give up a couple of things. What I am seeing, though, is a lot of times it's not coming from a place of long-term strategic thinking, but more so short-term frustration or lack of understanding. And the AI is moving so fast, I don't understand it. I'm not sure what that means for me. I'm not sure what that means for HR. There's so much other things on my plate. So you know what? We're just going to hit the delete button on that. Does that work in the 6 to 8 months time frame? Absolutely. Sometimes you have to ruthlessly prioritize. Do I think it's going to harm the practice in the long run? Probably, because when you are sort of a fish into the bigger IT pond, as I'm going to call it, you are going to get prioritized here and there, whether it's to your benefit or to your detriment. And I think from an HR standpoint, it's like, what are the costs that you're willing to put up with, and what are sort of the timeline lags that you're willing to put up with in making that decision and in making that move? And I'm not certain that every organization I've spoken to has thought through that before they said, you know what, I'll pass it over to IT, they'll figure it out and move on from there.
I think my gut is, as you point out, good thing next 6 to 8 months, don't have to put it on my plate, but longer term, you're losing a large part of the strategic part of the function, and you're setting yourself up for a lot of, they picked XYZ solution because they don't get what we do, and this is annoying now because we have to use like this tool that we never had any say in, when you might have put yourself in that situation. And I think like the organizations you're talking about, it's like fairly explicit, right? It's like, hey, IT takes this, but I think sometimes it's implicit where HR, I've seen, and we always counsel against this, has sort of said like, hey, like, we're taking a back seat because we don't think we're the experts here or whatever, versus like, hey, we're not the experts, but like, let's rely on other stakeholders to keep the ball in our court. Corey, from your perspective, you're getting to see, hundreds of businesses a year in the HR tech ecosystem. When you look at their go-to-market, are you seeing a shift in selling not as much to HR and to other stakeholders, maybe IT specifically, maybe it's, CFO or something else too?
Yes. And I think, and first of all, Phil, thank you for the very kind introduction. And I always learn a ton from you as well. So I always appreciate our interactions. So I have the opportunity, based on what we do, to talk to companies across a wide range of scale. So because we invest in not super early stage, but earlier stage, like we invest in companies with anywhere between 1 and 10 million of revenue. Those businesses are, kind of hack whatever they need to do to and the go to market. Generally rapidly growing, although it's been a tougher market. And one of the trends I'll talk about is just kind of the prevailing sluggishness of the market in 2024. We also do advisory work, meaning like growth equity raises and M&A transactions for companies with more than 10 million of ARR. And because of all those, kind of tie those things together, we do research on the sector, including we used to do sell-side equity research on public companies, which is part of how we met originally. So one of the hats I used to wear was covering all the public companies in the space, continue to talk to the large public companies as well. So across that whole spectrum, you're going to get kind of different answers somewhat, but I think it is a good thing that HR has become less siloed. Like it used to be the case that you sold into HR, they'd make their own decisions. If it got big enough, the CFO got involved. And increasingly, I think HR does have a seat at the strategic table. And because I think companies of all sizes realize that humans aren't just widgets, they're a strategic asset. And kind of the price you pay for that strategic seat at the table is you're going to be more integrated with more functions, and you're going to have to sell to other functional areas like IT. And certainly when you're dealing with software, IT is going to have to get involved one way or another. The kind of the tricky thing about the past few years is there are a few tidal wave force trends all happening at the same time, and disaggregating the relative effect of all those isn't an easy thing to do. You've got the AI tidal wave, and what can we use technology for that humans used to do? What functions could IT do that HR did historically? You also have a trend of a tough economy over the past couple of years, and I think that's impacted some of these things. And so some of what you're seeing is as much like, is there a way we can do this for less money? And that's impacting things. And then as well as just the progress of AI. And then the third is coming out of the pandemic and how's that affecting the world of work? And you put all those things together, that's the trend you're seeing right now. I think some of these things are going to persist and accelerate. And I do think IT is going to be involved in decision-making process around tools of all sorts that way. But other things may be more transitory. Like I do think, given the strategic importance of HR, budgets will start to improve. There will be more there for best of breed solutions. And some of what you're seeing that feels like a shift away may shift back from that piece of the phenomena.
Yeah, it's interesting. I share a lot of your same sentiment. I know, Lydia, you've seen more movement from this sort of traditional SaaS buying cycle to more of like a pilot and experimentation sort of pricing. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the solutions that you've seen there, and how HR teams can leverage the flexibility of maybe trying a little bit before you buy, even if you do have to put up some amount of capital?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the context behind that, and Corey touched on this a little bit earlier as well, it's really the rapid pace of change that we're seeing now, not just on a professional front, but on a personal front as well. Because with AI and everything else, the penetration is across all spectrums of life. And it's not necessarily a resistance of AI that we're seeing in the market, but a fear of loss and a kind of going into the unknown of what the future could look like. So change management 101, back to the basics of, in absence of having full control over everything, what do you do? And the immediate answer is never try to boil the ocean in one shot. It's always taking little chunks and trying to figure out what's going on. So a lot of organizations that I've spoken with, that I've worked with, I think on the solution provider side, we are getting more into the, oh, actually people aren't signing up for these 3-year deals anymore because there's a lot of IT vetting, procurement vetting, and everything else. They're asking us for ROI. We can't prove ROI until we get ourselves in there, et cetera. And on the buyer side, it's a lot of, I'm putting up my political capital to guarantee that a solution is going to work. A 3-year long political capital is a lot without me having to charge you out in the first place. And if we take the ideas from the consumer market where you can get like a month free on your YouTube premium subscription, you can get a week free of this, a week free of that here and there, they're now kind of taking that mentality into their working world of saying like, okay, well, if you want me to put my political capital and everything I've built in this organization behind your solution, instead of me making a big chunk commitment, here's a time span, prove to me that it actually works. So I think we're seeing a lot more for the organizations who can't move away from the traditional SaaS model. We're seeing a lot more pilots, a lot more proof of concepts happening. For the organizations who are able to pivot their pricing models a little bit more, because of AI, we're actually seeing a rise in volume-based pricing because consumption costs cannot be neglected when we're talking about AI. And more importantly, we're also seeing individual licensing agreements, meaning swipe a credit card for the cost of like a cup of coffee a month, a cup of coffee a day. You can be smarter than your coworkers, than your counterpart. You can look more brilliant. Here's how we're going to get you there. So I think the what's in it for me plus let me test it out before I commit is really driving a lot of what I would call like creative solutioning around the traditional SaaS model and how we revamp that model to match closer to the consumer side of the house that we've been seeing.
I know I was listening to a podcast over the weekend between a couple of venture capitalists and talking about the number of companies that they see that are 5 employees that have 5 million of ARR now that are growing 400% a year, because it's like they go to, the CIO for some company and they say, hey, we can take this thing that's like really clunky and replace it. Here's the demo. And people are like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. Let's do it. And you saw that with other sort of revolutions like mobile or cloud or whatever. Corey, have you seen pockets of just like no-brainer AI use cases that HR or recruiting professionals are like, yes, this is amazing. This is such a no-brainer. Let's do it. Like just super strong product market fit, I guess.
The closest I've seen to no-brainer, and everything's under budget scrutiny right now, so I don't know if there's any such thing as really no-brainer. But the closest I've seen to no-brainer are things that automate what I'd call repetitive, boring tasks that are not clearly. If you add the AI, it's not taking away someone's job. Like the kind of inconvenient truth of a lot of the technologies is that ultimately the ROI will come in part from replacing people. And that is, everybody dances around that. Like you can't effectively sell HR technology saying we're going to replace your people. It's just the HR people are not, they're wired to focus on people, right? So the closest things are when it's just a really repetitive task. Things like responding to questions about benefits, things like scheduling candidate interviews or outreach around recruiting. Things that free up recruiter time to actually spend time with candidates as opposed to doing kind of back end busy work, hunting around LinkedIn or scheduling interviews or that kind of thing. So solutions that are like that we've seen take off significantly because you're just making everybody's lives easier, and there's a pretty hard ROI on it. The closer you get to this is going to take out someone's job, so far the harder it is.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think my advice to the vendors pitching that solution and the HR professionals pitching it internally is, every HR professional I've ever talked to probably is like drastically under-resourced and fighting absurd amounts of fires on a weekly and monthly basis. And forget who did this study. It was in our latest HR Tech Trends ebook, I think something like 40 or 50% of HR professionals are having to work extra time just to keep up, like not even like get ahead or anything like that. And so, if you can take, let's say, 2 or 3 hours even a week off your plate by answering, how do I do open enrollment, with a chatbot that costs, next to nothing. I think the pitch internally is probably like, and therefore I got to work on, XYZ strategic, redefining our employee value propositions, re-architecting our people analytics strategy, whatever the case may be. So the CFO is not sort of smelling like, hey, maybe there's a reduction in headcount or hiring freeze we can do here. Corey, you mentioned a couple minutes ago about, you think best of breed is going to be sort of the future here. Actually, one quick thing. I will remind everybody on the phone, please ask any question that you have throughout this conversation. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And the ones we don't get to, we'll try to email you with a follow-up. But I think it's always amazing to hear what folks are thinking about as they listen to this. But one thing that kind of caught my eye is this, best of breed versus suite, age-old sort of argument. And maybe it's always, okay, Rochelle, I'll get to you in 2 seconds. I love seeing that pop up in the chat. What are your thoughts, Corey, about, like, I'm an HR professional for a 50 employee company, 250, 1,000, like, who should be thinking about best in breed versus suite? Maybe everybody should be thinking about best of breed, but it's a certain number of solutions.
Yeah.
What's your framework?
Depending on the size of your company, there's only so many solutions you can digest at a given time. I do think that as far as optimizing functionality, we've swung pretty hard, too hard in the suite direction over the past couple of years because of budget pressures. And the reality is, and I'm not going to name names on vendors, but the reality is, like, Workday is not going to be the best for everything. Like, their solution's really good for the core stuff. They're not going to be the best at everything. And HR professionals are naturally intellectually curious and want to find the best solution and want to try new things. So I do think there is a place for best of breed, and I do think that pendulum will start to swing back in that direction. I think if you're a software provider, I think generally, I don't want to give generic advice because it totally depends on what your solution is, but SMBs aren't going to buy like 20 different HR solutions, right? It's just highly unlikely. If you have a vertical specific solution, like there may be things that are specific to the restaurant industry, for example. That could make sense if you've got a vertical solution in the SMB market. But generally for the SMB market, the default is going to be do as much as you can with whomever it's often the payroll provider who's also the talent management provider, and then plug in the things that are specific to you. I tend to find, as a general rule of thumb, the mid-market is often a good place to start because they do
What's your
have
definition of mid-market?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a hard and fast definition, depends on what your solution is, but call it 500 to 5,000 employees, as a starting point. That market, often you'll get more kind of growing companies in that market, and that means inherently they're searching for new solutions. They've got the bandwidth and the wherewithal to buy multiple best of breed solutions, but you're not dealing with the complex cycles and potentially committees and procurement that you go through when you're dealing with the Fortune 500. So that is very generic. People should not take that advice as like absolute regardless of your solution. We've invested and built great companies that are almost entirely focused on Fortune 500 and others that are SMB. But I find in the HR tech space, it tends to be a sweet spot in terms of market opportunity, ability to purchase, willingness to buy multiple solutions, to go kind of in that mid range initially. I don't know if that was answering your question or if I was touching on your question, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, it sure does. I think, it depends. The smaller you are, the more consolidated your tech stack is going to be, because you just don't have the headspace and you can't handle too many of these things. You don't have the capacity, and you might have one or two really specific point solutions. That's great. And as you grow, you're going to get more and more in there as well. Rochelle,
Well, could I just I apologize.
Go
Can I
ahead.
just quickly, I just wanted to follow up on what Lydia
Yeah.
was saying about pricing models. I do think a really important theme for not just this space, but software in general is going to be pricing models. And in HR technology, always for most solutions, one of the challenges you have to overcome is proving ROI. And so I agree with Lydia that there's been a shift toward more pilots. There's going to be more experimentation because in an AI world, it's not clear that a per seat model is the right model when effectively you're adding value in a completely different way that hasn't been fully institutionalized yet. I think people are just figuring that out. I do think the good thing is it's kind of forcing a tying of pricing to value and ROI, which I think ultimately will make everything stickier. But I think that's going to be one of the big themes in 2025.
Yeah. I think for anybody out there, maybe who hasn't bought it as much tech or whatever, many of these solutions are priced per seat or how large your organization is, and the sales rep kind of says like, all right, that's $20,000 or whatever. And most of these AI solutions are per some sort of consumption, right? So maybe it's per chat or per phone call or whatever the case may be, and that's why a lot of them you can try it for free, or it's 9 cents per call minute or something like that, and you can really understand the value pretty quickly. Rochelle, I think your question is effectively like, who is sort of on the hook for an AI that goes rogue in some capacity and maybe does something that's non-compliant, which I don't know the legal answer to. That's a really good question. And then what is sort of our definition of AI versus automation? I'll take a stab at that one, and perhaps one of our two esteemed panelists has more of a nuanced answer for the prior. I think the latter question, AI versus automation, the AI is basically like smart software and can do some sort of like inference based workflow. So an example might be, in an ATS, typical automation might be once a candidate gets to this stage, send them this email. So somebody gets, they pass the phone screen and therefore send them an email that has a link to book the meeting with the hiring manager, versus an AI step might be they get to that stage in the interview process, look at their resume, look at the interview notes, craft them some sort of feedback email, and take those notes and send them to the hiring manager prior to the next meeting, which is obviously it's not possible with an if or once this then that sort of paradigm, which is automation. I don't know if either of you have any perspective, and of course nobody here is a lawyer, on who sort of foots the bill for the AI goes rogue, discriminates against women in the hiring practice. Is that on TA or is that on the vendor?
I'm going to get a really nerdy answer here because I think the question was also like, what is automation versus AI, right? Like, if we go back into sort of the academic definition of AI, technically automation is AI because the definition of artificial intelligence is machines doing things on behalf of humans. And in any process, RPA, automation related item, it is machines doing things on behalf of humans. That said, where I think the OFCCP part of it, who's responsible, the onus and all of that is coming in, is because we're indexing quite a bit on the machine learning part of the AI models, of the process automation, and so on and so forth. And that's really where the training of certain models through data, through existing processes, et cetera, comes into play. And if we were to kind of trace back into that, who is ultimately responsible? There's a couple different angles that you can look at. Is the organization responsible? My argument would be yes, they are, because they're the ones who set out the internal processes, collected all the historical data, vetted, ideally, the AI solution and all of its testings and verified outcomes before that system solution was launched. So there is a human component of verification in there and keeping humans in the loop of an AI solution. Is the solution itself accountable as well? The answer is also yes, because when you're building a solution as a solution provider, it is your responsibility to make sure that the algorithm and the system itself is not inherently biased, regardless of how your customer feeds the data into it, so on and so forth. So I think, kind of tying into the theme of this conversation, 2025 is also where we're going to see, hopefully, a lot more collaboration between the solution provider and the buyer ecosystem, so that instead of like a finger pointing sort of interaction. It becomes more of a how can I help you to help me sort of relationship as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm optimistic you're right about that, Lydia. I think where you're potentially not going to see great collaboration is among lawmakers and regulators. And I think it is fair. Well, I'm not in the political prognostication business. I think it's kind of fair to assume there's going to be less regulation at the federal level over the next 4 years. And somewhat in response to that, it's going to be a patchwork among the states. States are already regulating this in different ways. I think some will feel motivated by if there is less regulation at the federal level to step in and do more. So, and any software business that's doing business in more than one state is going to have to comply with whatever they need to do in each one of those states, and it's going to be a total patchwork. So, I'm not a lawyer, but I would say make sure you understand all the places you're operating, where you've got nexus, where you've got employees, and that you understand what the requirements are in this regard in every one of those geographies, and have good counsel.
Yes. And this makes me think, hey, next year in Q1 we should have some lawyers on here and talk about employment law and AI. It's funny because my wife's a lawyer and we know like 8 employment lawyers, which is always for me the most interesting part of the law beyond criminal law. But at this point, what I'd like to do is we did this the last couple of webinars. I think it's always a big hit. The networking portion. So I'm going to put my LinkedIn in the chat. Anybody who wants to connect with me, feel free to connect with me. Anybody who's wants to connect with other people who are sort of learning about this topic, you're a forward-thinking practitioner, you're a consultant, you're a vendor, etc. Feel free to drop the URL for your LinkedIn into the chat. And it's sort of an open invitation for anybody and everybody to go and connect with you. And I think we made a lot of really great connections last time. And while folks are doing that, I want to answer Amit's question, which is around ghost jobs. Why do you see all these ghost jobs now? I think perhaps AI is a part of that, and technology has just made it easy to post jobs. And I think some talent acquisition professionals are perhaps optimistic that they will fill those jobs. Others are maybe building talent pipelines. For others, it could be, miscommunications on what are we actually hiring for. But I think probably it's not quite as nefarious. Thanks for everybody for posting their LinkedIns in here. And of course, now the chat goes crazy a little bit. Bob, interesting comment. ADP certainly emphasizes our ownership responsibility in regards to our own AI governance. And I think to a large extent that probably makes sense. If you think about any tool out there, I think there is, liability perhaps within, LinkedIn, if you are perpetrating a scam or doing something illegal on LinkedIn, but it's really up to the individual who's utilizing that tool. Where this technology, of course, is a bit different is that there is this sort of like inference or thinking component of it. And that obviously needs to have some level of governance. And that's why we're seeing some laws around utilizing automation in candidate screening, for example. I know New York State has outlawed it. I'm not sure if others have followed suit or not. But it's definitely something where I won't be shocked, especially when you think about, political motivations for there to be more crackdown on these sorts of technologies. But I think also from the company's perspective, it's going to be, the onus will be on the practitioner to make sure that they are utilizing the tools correctly in their particular use case. And Beth, thank you for sharing. This is a little bit buried now, but Beth White shared a link to a group that apparently has great advice about ethical and responsible AI. That's actually a topic of a webinar that we're doing next year. Please keep on the lookout for that. So thank you, everybody, for all of those LinkedIn shares in the comments. Corey, you started touching upon this, but I'd like to shift the conversation from 2024 to 2025. We're on the precipice of a new year. And I think that, the technology, it seems like, at least in my lifetime, it's like it changes and the rate of change continues to increase. Like the calculus, the first derivative kind of keeps increasing, which is a little scary for me. personally, and like, where are we going? But one thing that you mentioned as well for 2025 is around the new administration in the US and a more maybe focus on compliance when we're thinking about technology. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit more and what your advice might be to practitioners.
Yeah, sure. So I would, it's on everybody's mind. Like clearly, uh, what happens with the in the political realm is going to have a huge impact on the space and every space. So um, I guess I'd bucket that two different ways. One is uh, I think it's fair to say there will be an increased focus on compliance, certainly around whether people have the right to work in the U.S. Um, so things around that are going to become more of a focus. There's going to be more enforcement. Um, so vendors that provide those kinds of solutions, whether it's around I-9 state compliance, things like that, I think that's a very interesting area for the upcoming year. Um, the economy is going to affect all of us. It's a wild card. Right now, and I don't know if you saw, there was a recent survey that shows your optimism about the economy is almost like linearly correlated with what your political orientation is. If you're blue, you're pessimistic. If you're red, you're optimistic. I would say in the business community right now, there's a lot of optimism generally, and that's focusing on elements of the incoming administration or anticipated policies like tax cuts, less regulation. Um, and I think that's kind of prevailing in the business world right now. On the other hand, the reading this week on inflation was still kind of persistently high or higher. Um, Policies like tariffs and deportations, both of those had the potential to be inflationary. And a lot of the optimism in part revolves around the concept that interest rates are going to come down. And if there are policies that result in more inflation, then uh, rates are probably going to stick higher longer. Um, so these are I'd say wild cards right now. As I said, I think the optimism side in the business world is kind of winning out, but there's a lot to be determined. And for the moment, I'm seeing, just talking to a bunch of companies, it seems like budgets are freeing up a little bit. Like many of the companies I'm talking to are more optimistic about 2025 than they were about 2024 for political and economic reasons. There's a lot to be determined. There's a lot we may know as soon as January.
Very, very nuanced answer. I know, Lydia, you also harped upon the sort of budget constraint aspect of things a bit, and perhaps I'd love to go to you, and Corey, if you have anything to add, you as well. But let's say we are in a world next year where we don't, realize the optimism that's been reflected in the stock market, and budgets are still constrained. What is your advice to HR professionals, especially when it comes to technology budgeting?
Yeah, I think it's one piece of advice for HR professionals, but also another for solution providers, in case there's any of them on the call with us here today. For the HR professionals, I would say even if the optimism part of it plays out, we have to realize a lot of us may still be scarred from late 2023 into 2024. So we're not going to be on a happy spending spree as we were maybe back in 2021, and that might take a while to come back. So for those who have signed contracts in 2021 and probably have renewed or anything along those lines, there's still a pretty solid runway, which means from an HR standpoint, it's about going back to the basics of how do you run your change management? How do you run your project management to yield the most you can out of your existing tech stack? And how do you use those sort of back to the basic principles, if you will, in integrating and making more strategic choices about what you bring into the existing tech stack? Because fundamentally speaking, AI is great and all, but if we were to break it down 10 levels, with the rise of agentic AI and the next iteration of the AI conversation in HR technology, we still have a very, very fundamental problem from a tech stack standpoint, and that's like the I word, integration. Without integrations, everything is still not going to work, no matter how much of a beautiful world your solution providers have promised you. So don't look at the shiny, go back to the basics, figure out your change management and your project management. And I think my take for the solution providers in a similar regard is stop building solutions where it requires your customers an exorbitant amount of resources to get you up and running. It is insane how many times I've seen AI solutions where they promise to save you time, they promise to save you resources, but in order to reach that yield, you need an implementation team of 10 people as an SMB to get there. And that was a part of the equation that I don't think makes sense, quite frankly, to buyers anymore, especially as we go into 25, even with the economic optimism.
Thanks, Mike, for the comment. Yeah, I think we've all bought HR tech, and you then you sign the agreement, you get like the onboarding plan, and you're like, what? like this is insane, right? And then you get into it and you're like, this is even worse than I expected. And one thing we recommend is like, get that plan, take a look at those docs before you sign. And if it's like, look, if you're deciding between 3 HRSs, unfortunately, like you bite the bullet and go through it, but some are worse than others, obviously. Corey, I don't know if you have any words of advice for HR professionals in a world where maybe budgets are constrained to think about allocation or think about internal stakeholder management. How do you get more?
So the last thing you said is key. I think be mindful of kind of influence as best you can, influence maps, figure out. Then there's a whole bunch. We actually published a white paper on the go-to-market tech space earlier this year. And there's a lot of interesting technology out there that helps software providers of all sorts figure out who is the right influencer in an organization. So don't assume that the person you're talking to is sufficient, particularly as you go up market. It takes a lot of people to make a decision. So I don't think I'm saying anything that people on this call aren't aware of, but know that there are solutions out there. And actually, before we're done, I'll put my email address in here, and if you want to see that white paper or any of the research we publish, I'm happy to send it. So that's one thing. I totally agree with Lydia on the integration point. That's like, it's the proverbial needle off the record player. Like you think you got this great solution, and suddenly, like, yeah, we're not going to have this for 6 months. So I do think we published a report a while ago about some providers who are doing interesting things kind of just in the integration space to make that go more smoothly, both for customers and for vendors. So I think that's a really interesting area. And I do think this is a problem that over time is going to get solved and make it possible to buy best of breed solutions and decrease the time to value. So I think technology, I probably sound like a venture capitalist. I do think technology will help solve a lot of these problems over time.
You're in the right field of work.
Right.
But yeah, I know one area you're super excited about is people analytics. What's sort of coming in the pipeline in 2025 and how that world is changing?
So this is going to sound really, really basic, but for anyone who has ever had to scrub their way through like a 10,000 data point data set via Excel spreadsheet and pivot tables, I think one of the biggest things for me is the ability of using AI to data cleanse. So going back to Corey's very initial point of the mundane stuff that you really, really don't want to do, data cleansing and just kind of getting your data set right before you even pop it into the reporting and analytics pipeline, I think is going to be huge. I think the other thing too is with the rapid growth of technology and just different iteration of technology that's coming to the market, the skill sets of what it's going to take to do people analytics and what does doing people analytics mean in the new world of tech is also going to be a little bit different. I don't think we're expecting people to code R, Python, be Excel and Google Sheet expert necessarily any longer, because there are relatively cheap forms of technology that can do that. But it's now the next elevated level of how do you have a better conversation with insights? How do you support HR decisions with data? How do you participate in leadership conversations with data-driven insights? And I think that change we're seeing in the people analytics side of the house will very likely also be reflected across the board for HR as well as technology adoption increases, and we're kind of elevating from the doing into the more advising and the thinking part of the world.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's definitely like a ton to be optimistic about. And I also think that, you know, the idea of like, it's like, oh gosh, now I need to like learn how to cleanse a spreadsheet or something. It's like, it's actually a heck of a lot easier than you think. And that's sort of like the amazing, shift that we're seeing here. And I think one of the, and that's really what I always think about AI. Somebody, I'll rip them off, said it's augmented intelligence. It's really meant to augment what we're doing, make us, better, faster, smarter. And one of the areas that it's doing that in the most is computer programming. And I think that's why you're seeing sort of like the cost of developing these softwares go down considerably, to the point where I think a lot of folks are actually wondering, how much of this should I own as a company? And I think even at like our scale of SSR, which we're not exactly a huge company, we're thinking about, especially for these AI agents, like, do we want to build our own on top of a certain stack so that we own the data? There's, less sort of like compliance risk. We own more of the prompting, and we're sort of building like almost like an employee, like we're training this person, we're coaching this person. We don't want to pay a license forever to keep this person. And maybe that vendor comes back to us and says, you know what, the ROI you're getting is X. We're going to charge you, 50% of that and increase your pricing 3X. It's a scary future for companies. And I'm wondering if you all have thought about, particularly as it comes to these AI agents or AI use cases, or really any other part of your tech stack, such as you become a larger company, like how much of it do you want to own yourself as the cost of software development goes down versus renting it as a service via a SaaS provider?
I can start, and Lydia, you can chime in. I mean, I as you might imagine, we spend a lot of time here talking about this question. Certainly with AI, we're increasingly entering a world where it's possible to produce software relatively inexpensively. And I don't think we're all the way there yet. This is a journey, but where people who aren't even trained in technology can produce software just by describing what they're looking for. I think the closer you get to an internal application that has workflows that don't require interaction with the outside world, the closer we are to that. I think the limiting factor is not pretty soon here going to be the ability to create the software, but the importance of ecosystem and data. And we also, one of my partners focuses on the cybersecurity space. So I talk about that a lot. And that's not a trivial thing either, like building in all the security requirements that outside vendors take care of. So I don't think we're close to a point where everyone is just going to have their own software for everything for all those reasons. But the closer you get to this doesn't need to interact with the outside world, just a pure like workflow, that the more I do think you're going to see people creating their own stuff that is customized to exactly what they need, as opposed to having to pay a subscription to rent something else.
Yeah, but I think, Corey, just building on what you said, one thing I will say for any HR practitioners listening to this is now might be a good time to look at your HR operating model, because no longer are you required to plug a human into every part of the process, but rather reevaluate where it is absolutely critical to have that human touch and to have someone to be in the process versus getting a piece of technology to do the work. So it's definitely one of those situations where I think we can argue the future is here, but it's also not too late to start building yourself towards it.
It's never too late, especially with the low barriers to entry from a cost and learning perspective on many of these tools. I mean, anybody can, pay $20 a month for ChatGPT. We did a really interesting live demo of using ChatGPT and a couple of similar models for HR stuff last month. And, and you can watch that webinar and you can learn 10 different ways of using this in 45 minutes. It's pretty incredible. So don't feel like you're far behind. And we're going to start Q&A here in a second. Again, we've got 20 plus questions. If you got other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But I also think that sometimes people join a webinar like this and they're like, I need to learn more about HR tech. And then it's like now I have like 10,000 more questions, right? It's like I learned something, but I also realized maybe I need more help. And I think that a lot of folks come to us in that moment where it's like, hey, we don't necessarily have all the answers, and we do need help. We're looking at what should be our next purchase. We hate our existing HRIS payroll provider, whatever. We need an ATS, whatever. And if you're in that situation and you need help, I'm going to put a link in the chat right now. Feel free to book a time with one of our advisors for free that will look at your business, understand it, understand what you need from an integrations perspective, et cetera, and point you in the right direction. So please take advantage of that offer. Okay, so let's get into the questions that were left in the RSVP form. And again, if you have other questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can here in the next 8 to 10 minutes. The first one is around, do you think there's a tool that will be able to accommodate all of the latest features and functionality in the near future? If so, do you think teams will have enough confidence from a compliance perspective? And of course, we're seeing companies like Rippling, Deal, Bamboo, et cetera, like just like every quarter, it's like, and now we do this, and now we do this. And a lot of people are sort of racing to be that comprehensive tool set, especially for SMB mid-enterprise. Corey, I'm curious, just because you have this sort of broader perspective on what's going on in HR tech, are there super robust solutions out there that you think, and will this just be the trend where it's like, hey, building these modules isn't as hard as it was 5 years ago, and therefore everybody's going to have everything?
There will certainly be the bigger companies in the space will continue to add functionality, whether it's by internal development or acquisition. So certainly your vendors are, if you're on the HR side, are going to keep telling you like, now we do this, so you don't need this other vendor. I don't think, to answer the question, no, I don't think we're going to be in a world where there's a single vendor that has like everything you need. Simplistically, unless Workday and Microsoft combine, people are going to want both Workday and LinkedIn, right? I do think that the HR world, and really all technology, is a dialogue in a sense. There's always changes that are going on in the market as well as on the provider side. And as long as that's the case, there's always going to be evolution, and there's always going to be someone new and innovative doing something different, creating a lot of value that the entrenched players don't have. I don't see that changing ever, no matter what happens with AI, no matter how many functions the big players get. So no, I do think that AI and other things will allow the big vendors to hone what they do, but there's always going to be something new and some great entrepreneur coming up with a new thing, and I think there's always going to be a place for new solutions
and a place for venture capitalists to help them continue to grow. So,
yes.
Bob, I'm just joshing you. Bob makes a really good point, which is, and I think it's interesting that Bob also earlier in the call mentioned that he uses ADP, emphasizes that like it's not just about the software, it's about the service, right? It's customer success. It's not just the tool, it's how to use it. And that's obviously internal, but it's also, do you have a great account manager? Are they going to onboard you effectively? Data migration, blah, blah, blah. That stuff. Yeah. If you don't use it, or you don't know how to use it, or what have you, there's no value there. Lydia, you talked about some of the use cases with AI. I don't know if there's any that you want to put, any more that you want to put on people's radar. And there's another question around, what should people be doing to learn and train? And are there good resources out there that you found that somebody could get up to speed on this topic?
So I'm going to answer the last question first as a shameless self-plug here. So every week I basically do an AI for HR segment in under 90 seconds. So literally 90 seconds, which is about the same time to stir your coffee and all of that fun stuff. There is a little nugget that is going to pop in on my LinkedIn profile. And I think the other thing too is, above and beyond following like influencers and all of that fun stuff, it's using AI in your day-to-day life so you get more comfortable with it, right? It's as easy as just going on, signing up for ChatGPT Perplexity, ask it a couple questions, and now you have a working knowledge of how Gen AI models work, as well as how different types of Gen AI models work. Is it going to make you an expert? Absolutely not. But are you going to be dangerous enough in the next technology conversation to at least ask the question of, what are you doing with my data? Can you remember my preferences as ChatGPT does? And do I have a right to delete my memory from your system as ChatGPT does for me? That's enough, I think, from an everyday HR practitioner standpoint. And from a use cases perspective, I think it's less about chasing the shiny. So again, going back to the basics, what is that business problem that you're looking to solve? What is the outcome? How would you solve it normally? And then figure out, is AI going to become a part of it or not? Because at the end of the day, as shiny as AI is, it's a tool set. It's like a hammer in your tool chest. You don't buy a hammer to think about, how am I going to use a hammer? You look at a nail that's sticking out on your floor and say to yourself, I'll probably need a hammer for that.
Yep, I love it as somebody who has shiny object syndrome, but also I think I'm like afraid of how bright this object is and what it potentially will be once the light goes away, or whatever the metaphor would imply. But I think, yeah, getting back to basics, just realizing, hey, this is another tool in your tool set. Just continue to learn, find folks like yourself out there that make it digestible and accessible to keep learning about this. Corey, we've got a couple of questions that sort of relate to what's the next wave coming in HR technology as it relates to artificial intelligence, and what can we do to prepare ourselves as HR professionals?
Adopt an attitude of lifelong learning. Like, think ahead, just try stuff. Like, a lot of it is pretty experimental at this point, but rather than relying on business development reps to tell you what you need, just do your own research. Certainly talk to Phil, and just try it, because you got to assume as an HR professional that all the people in your company are, there's going to be a continuum of how cutting edge they are. Some people are going to be way on the bleeding edge and trying new stuff. And you should at least be aware of what they're doing. So that's kind of a blanket easy answer, but try not to get caught up in the weeds of it's hard, but caught up in the weeds of day to day. But make sure to find some time to learn from others in your organization, experiment, and try it yourself.
Yeah, love it. I know that everybody has calls in 3 minutes, employee relations issues or what have you, some sort of fire alarm that's gone off in your email since the start of the hour. I really appreciate Lydia, Corey, you all for sharing your insights, the folks on the phone or on the call for sharing their opinions, their questions, their LinkedIn profiles. I hope that you've made some great connections here. We do monthly webinars. You'll get this recording. You'll also get an email about the upcoming webinar that we have in January. The last question we had was around what is the most affordable HRIS out there for small businesses. And I think that there are a number of good options. Obviously there's the kind of typical players, the Bamboos, the Ripplings, the et cetera. There's actually a company coming from Europe called Factorial, which has extremely easy on the eyes PEPM pricing. But the end of the day, I think a lot of it comes down to negotiation. And we actually have a lot of data about what people pay for their HRIS that we were happy to share with anybody who's in market trying to figure this stuff out. And again, I'll drop, because I know it gets lost in the chat, a link to book a call with somebody in our team. If you're like, hey, we're a 50 employee company, this is what we pay for HRIS, or we're getting screwed, or we want to move off of this vendor and find something else, like what should we actually be budgeting here? We can share that data with you and hopefully be helpful. Again, thank you all so much. And hopefully we'll see you January 21st. We're going to be talking about future-proofing your workforce, HR skills, and training initiatives that focus on with Andy Storch, as well as Terry Zog-Arnell. It's going to be a great conversation. Again, thank you so much to everybody on the phone, Corey and Lydia. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks.